Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Daily AI Show live on LinkedIn and YouTube. It's Friday, August 9th. And today we have me, Carl, and myself, Andy. We're going to be talking today about tuning AI models and whether or not tuning a model from scratch, which can be done with a large enough data set, is a risky proposition now, given the enormous investment that's being made in frontier model generation, and then the reduction of those very large parameter models into very capable smaller models as a foundation in a process called transfer learning, where you take the learning that's already existing in a pre-trained model, and then you fine-tune that model in order to possess it of the information and data that's specific to your domain, whether that be healthcare or financial services, and to your company specifically. And I think this question really became topical and interesting because Bloomberg, a very large and successful financial company, Bloomberg terminals have been in front of everybody on Wall Street and in every financial oriented company since I can remember. Bloomberg, at the advent of AI, decided to build their own AI model from scratch. Bloomberg GPT, it's called. And they spent a considerable amount of time and effort. That model was trained on about 350 billion parameters of financial data from Bloomberg's own data set. So you can see why they were initially interested in doing that, because they had the data. And so if they're trying to build an AI model that's capable in operating in the world of high finance, then Bloomberg has that data. In addition to the 350 billion parameters they used from their own data, they used 350 billion of external data from the web in order to train the model on general things like language, because a lot of the financial data is shown in numbers and or internal processes. And my guess is also that their training data didn't include a lot of multimedia. So multimodal training is really essential. And it could be that the 350 billion parameters of additional data that they added to the financial data was inclusive of video and audio and images. Probably a lot of their data internal to the Bloomberg data was, charts and graphs. So it did have some multimodal capabilities. But the reason we're talking about it is that there are indications that Bloomberg has abandoned the strategy of building their AI from scratch and instead focusing on taking a smaller pre-trained model and fine-tuning it with Bloomberg data. And then this gives rise to the title of the show, which is it too risky to spend all the money to build your own model when you can transport a lot of the learning that's delivered in the arena of reasoning and language skills, multiple languages, for example, that's being done by the major frontier model generators, and then just fine tune it using either a retrieval augmented generation system attached to that frontier model, or actually fine-tuning a starting kernel model that you've selected from open source or from among the companies that do offer fine-tuning of their frontier models. And most of them do. At the enterprise level, if you want to take OpenAI's GPT-4o model and fine-tune it, you can do that. Same with Google, same with Amazon, for example. So, but the starting question is, was it worth it for Bloomberg and other companies who trained their own AIs to have started from scratch rather than using a a transfer learning model, which is start with an existing model and its capabilities and fine tune it beyond that. So that's an introduction to what we're talking about today.
I want to just give a...
You're a little low volume, Carl.
I hate my mic. My audio is...
I still can't hear Carl.
Hold on.
Yeah. Okay.
Was that now better?
A little better, but still pretty low.
Oh my goodness. Hold on.
Well, while you're working on that, I wanted to address the question that Andy... Oh, that's perfect.
Okay. There you go.
All right, go for it.
All right. Okay. I wanted to point out that the cost to train Bloomberg GPT, the estimation was anywhere around 2 million. There's some reports around 10 million. For a company some companies that's not very much, some companies it's a lot. And then the approximation was they used 1.3 million hours of GPU time on NVIDIA's A100s. So they actually bought A100s to train it. What was funny...
And it took 49 days for them to do it. Yeah.
The crazy thing is the issue was that in a Ethan Mollick article was that GPT-4, because it was trained on 3.5, but GPT-4 was better in all aspects of everything, right? So essentially your Bloomberg GPT has been, as Sam Altman called, has been steamrolled by GPT-4. Now, what's crazy is in our conversations with different companies, especially enterprise ones, I've heard companies have trained their own internal GPT. So there's companies who have created, I don't know whether it's their internal chat or whatever it is to protect their data. The only problem with that, when I was thinking about it, is, yeah, cool, you did that, and I don't know how much it costs you to do this. However, once those models, like you said, Andy, voice, vision, it's very difficult to retrain those things to incorporate some of those other elements, right? So, and then I can see, especially in enterprise, the like the security and the infrastructure required to, keep that in whatever compliant in your company. So how are you going to prevent the vision? How are you going to do voice? How are you going to prevent agents? How are you going to... These are things from a pure security perspective are a little bit difficult and something that hasn't been actually ever thought of before, right? And so is it really worth it to spend all that money for an internal chatbot? Yeah, I'm still not sure, right? And especially when now there are third-party options like Microsoft Copilot Studio, ChatGPT for Enterprise. I would probably say that's a better solution than trying to build your own and trying to keep up with everything that's happening. I think some of those companies were too quick to pull the trigger, especially from a safety perspective.
I think it's less of a question. Valid security is and safety is completely valid and definitely part of their consideration. But I think overall, what any significantly large enterprise is concerned with is control, right? That's why they're willing to spend $10 million on making their own specialized LLM or their own specialized AI model, because they know every part of it from start to finish and they have complete control of it. That way they can do whatever they want with it without having to rely on an external source. And I'm thinking for most, for a company the size of Bloomberg, the more, and those other sized companies, that's what's their concern. They can answer security and safety because they control every aspect of the LLM. Is it going to be an additional cost? Is it part of their program or their plan? Absolutely. Right. How they're going to implement, they can control what access there's going on there. They can control all of the information going in and out of designing the LLM to the usage of the LLM. Right. And like Andy just pointed out, they did that in 49 days, right? If it only costs $10 million and you're making hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and this LLM could potentially bring you a greater level of business above that $10 million, then the math checks out. Like 49 days, what is that? That's less than 2 months. So we could have a new LLM every 2 months if we needed to make the expenditure. Is that now a line item, on the books? So every year you just, we'll just update it. Oh, we like this new feature that was announced in other foundational models. Let's work that in, right? And then when you have other methodologies like, LoRa and all these other things to make things smaller and faster, or if you have like Sakana's evolutionary merge, you can go, oh, I like that piece. And that's in this open source model. Let's put that in there. And now this is ours. Or we like this piece, or we've built a bunch of them, right? We've built a bunch of different of our own LLMs that accomplish very specific goals. And then we've merged them. We've evolved them into a new version. So I think for cost, it really depends at where you're at. If it costs $10 million to give you an LLM that is satisfactory for your business to help you in whatever your process is, but you're not making $100 million a year, or whatever ratio is valid today, then sure, maybe that's not valuable. But if you make $500 million a year and it costs you $10 million to make a new LLM in 2 months, that's
I don't know, because I've seen too many, like some of the companies that we work with, like one of them created one and they're like, well, we created one because we wanted to protect, and this is how much it costs. It was cool. And then, but our usage is low. One of the requests is, could you help people use this? And then I used it and I was like, hey, this is for me. This is from you. And I'm just gonna be honest. This sucks compared to this. I will just straight out point this out. If I here's the question I would ask here. And I just brought up, I was like, okay, how, first of all, from a usability and level of trust you could use this, how good do you think it is? It's like, I think it's about a 7. It's like, okay. And then, you do the prompt A versus B.
Right.
I obviously use Claude 3.5 to take the writing level to the next. And I just level tested it. And I was like, so why would an employee use this when I could use this for free? It was like, but the data, it's like, oh, okay, how, but your team is using it to write content. I could use this to write content. It's like, how much of they are using it? And then, right?
I think that's the real question. I think you brought up the real question is, so the assumption that we're making when a company decides to make their LLM is they've answered all those questions already, right? And I think that's the assumption. Is your example is that company didn't ask those questions. They didn't plan. They didn't show how they were going to apply it, how their users were going to use it, and how it was going to be a benefit to their company versus using something off the shelf or from another organization. But that's the decision you got to make first is, does it satisfy all of these things, and is control our higher priority? Because I agree with you. I think, the vast majority of the time, you can take the safety and security steps, you can take the data protection steps, the privacy steps with an off-the-shelf LLM, right? And if you really have an issue with implementation, go look at open source, right? It's still, there's one level of disconnect there, right? It's open source as opposed to OpenAI or, Google or whatnot. But, it's like, where is your priority list? But overall, yes, Carl, I completely agree. These guys are going to be better because that's their whole job. Their whole job is to make better stuff. Their whole job is to come out with the next foundational model and the next features and, GPT-5 and all those kinds of things. So if your idea is, oh, we should have our own LLM, but we need these features, and okay, cool, we're going to implement it. Sure, that does, and then 3 months down the line, OpenAI comes out with GPT-5 and beats all of your metrics and all of those kinds of things, then you're stuck, right? What was Sam's thing? If you build something based off of our existing model, we're going to steamroll you.
That's what I mean. Are you just creating a internal GPT-4 wrapper around your piece? And start some of the things that I think we also need to think about is, okay, cool, but what happens when is it the same thing when an agent comes out for both? Is it the same thing when your reasoning is higher? And some of the things like you were talking about control. How do you control when things are becoming like, I keep going back to the OpenAI 5 levels. How do you control something whose reasoning is higher? How do you control agents that can run for days? How do you control things that can start innovating by itself? And then I don't know how you can control an AI that would run the organization by itself, right? It's like, you don't have AI researchers at these companies. You have people who could fine tune. It's easy to learn how to do that and maybe create your own. But then there's very, very few companies that are going to go buy H100s and take the days to train it. Like that's a cost. And are you going to start buying Blackwells in a year or two? Are you going to buy the next?
You need an AI department.
Exactly. Literally
LLM.
Just to do that.
Yeah, exactly. You need your head of AI research, your ML researcher and engineer. You'll need your entire IT staff that's surrounding the hardware. Yeah, exactly. And so that's a huge investment.
Yeah.
So you have to balance that with, okay, we want a serious product, but we want it to be private. Whatever that guiding principle is, you're gonna have to pay for it, right? Yeah. If it's gonna be good, if you're gonna keep up or anything along those lines. Yeah.
But we get back to the point that the frontier models appear to have enough data ingestion to supersede even the most valiant efforts by an individual company to develop a model that is really bespoke to their domain. So let me use the example of health. So if you're looking for a medical assistant, you would think that, okay, maybe Cerner or one of those major EHR companies might have access to enough data, which they could, de-identify and, make private to a certain degree and use as training data. So they could train a model from scratch on medical detection, medical advice, clinical reasoning. But GPT-4o can pass the clinical reasoning exam for doctors. So how did it get that information? And does its generalization and capacity for analogy, is that so much more advanced in terms of intelligence that even without the really extreme volume of data that could be available to a custom domain like healthcare, it's capable of, once given a series of prompts, to present back the correct answers. So it's like we're kind of throwing money away if we're training our own intelligences out there. But I still believe that there are certain circumstances in which the application is narrow enough, it's unique enough, it's not just general conversation or content generation, but it's actual workflow management in a specific discipline. And there's a very large corpus of data that's available to train from scratch. I can see there being some advantages to having a proprietary one. And let's take military as an example. Like you might not want to use GPT-4o for a major military application. You're going to have to do training on your own or in its own skiff, if you will. So there are exceptions to the rule, but I think the rule in my mind is that you ought to start with an existing well-trained model. It doesn't have to be one of the frontier models. It can be an open source model, and fine tune it on your company data, especially at the scale we're generally addressing here. Most of the major enterprises that have billion-dollar income statements, they could afford to train their own models, and many of them I'm sure have on a small scale, but they're probably also using some of the frontier models for different applications inside the enterprise.
Yeah, I agree. There is highly specialized reasons to do it. So I guess if the question is this, you're an enterprise company, you are concerned with data, you're concerned with having a specialized solution or having that level of control, will most of the time and money that you spend be worth it? Right. And I think collectively we're saying, no, your use case is, the majority of use cases are, we can fine tune, you can use open source, and you could fine tune an existing model or wrapper it like Carl was saying, right? And you can use RAGs and all those kinds of things. And that will solve the majority of use cases. And only in these highly specialized areas will you get your value from. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that's good. One of the things that is happening, I think, in the sort of the arena of training models is curation of data sets. So, the availability of data in sufficient volume to train an open AI model, like the next generation strawberry reasoning capable model that, we've talked about on the show, and it's obvious in the press that we're running out of the data that's available to train these models. And so synthetic data is required in many cases. But there's also an important step that's being pursued by a number of research entities and other government and public sector initiatives to curate data so that we're not just throwing a bunch of crap, including onion articles, into the training of the models. Confusing the model, because the model isn't, in most cases, these frontier models are doing what's called unsupervised training. They're just being fed the data. They have to make their own decisions in their own architecture about whether something is a parody, a spoof, or it's real data and factual data. But you can mark up data, curate it, deselect the things that are spurious, and present that data to a model and achieve a better result through training by addressing what the garbage going in is, right? Garbage in, garbage out. But we've fed our frontier models a lot of data that is not exactly what might want to teach them. That's what the source of many biases that we try to suppress after the fact are. They're basically just representations of what's out there that may be garbage on the internet. And so the model learns something. It doesn't know exactly how to distinguish whether this is morally right or morally wrong, unless it's been given examples of those. And giving it examples of what's right and what's wrong, that's not unsupervised training purely. It's supervised in the sense that you've curated the data going in and marked it up and given some cues to the training set as it goes in. So there's a bunch of things that are going on out there. I did a quick thing. There's a platform called Appen, APPEN, that offers curated data sets for deep learning with built-in quality control. There's some research and collaboration partnerships. MIT has an initiative, the Data Provenance Initiative, which is focused on making sure that the data that goes into training AI is known to be of high quality, high fidelity, they call it. Let's use high fidelity data rather than just throwing as much data as we can in there in the pursuit of a larger parameter training set in order to achieve an approximation of AGI ultimately.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's super important. I think one of our the famous tagline from Brian is clean up your house, right? That's that first step. I did want to, Carl, I know you've got a piece on agents, and how do you think that AI agents are going to change this question about training your own LLM? I think it'll have a huge impact, because I think the vast majority of things that we want done by an AI model can be done for us through agentic abilities.
I think most people are still like, there's a lot, like, I think very, 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 very few people are thinking from a agentic capability, right? The thought right now in terms of training is usually, hey, we need a version of ChatGPT internal that uses our data that we can control. We can see who's using it. We can see what questions are being asked, and it's internal only. I was like, okay, how do you then control, and maybe you can enable an agent that can go out and do things for you, schedule meetings for you. Let's start very simple things. Schedule meetings, respond to emails, I don't know, create financial plans when things come in. Very, very simple, and I say simple, but not very complex things. So how do you control those agents when they come out? Or there's some, how do you control something like a Devon when it realizes its true capabilities, to be able to just start coding on its own? Hey, I need you to, front end dev this. I need this for our UX, and I need this to do this function. Oh, it accomplishes all those functions by itself. Or as a real agent, it recognizes that it needs those functions without you telling it, and it just does it. So how do you control that type of capability inside a company? To me, there's just very, very few people who have been thinking that, and maybe we're still about a year away from that true agentic capabilities. So yeah, how do you do that and connect it to, if by the time the companies have those capabilities, people will have those capabilities, right? I have my personal agent to do whatever I want it to do. So how do you start melding personal agents, work agents, and connecting that with each other? Because you're thinking, if I have an agent, outside of your company, I want to work with other companies. I want my agent to engage with certain companies. Well, companies, it's inevitable that they will have their own agents to engage with your agents. So agent to agent. So how do you meld all those things together? Now, everyone's like, well, maybe this is still decades away. Like, no, I don't think so. Like if I go back to the OpenAI levels, it's 1, 2, 3. So if we're hitting reasoning very soon, the agentic is just going to follow right after. So I think that's something that we need to all think about. I know I'm thinking heavily about that, because that does change a lot of, not just training your own LLM. You can literally ask your agent to do that. So what are those things? And maybe I'm going into the Black Mirror capability, thinking now, but I think that's the whole goal, right? Isn't that the path to AGI, is these agents being able to do things on your behalf? So I think that's an important piece. And I think like businesses need to think about that component that is coming, and it is not just a static chatbot you chat against with your data.
Yeah, it comes recognizing how quickly these levels are going to be achieved. right? If a business thinks thinks annually, maybe they need to start thinking quarterly. In terms of, oh, this is out. Oh, this needs to be adapted to. Oh, we're seeing there. Everyone's saying that these agents are coming out. Okay, well, let's come up with a strategic plan for that. I could see that's
an interesting question to me is what kind of training sets are applicable to training an agent to do planning and execution. So this reminds me that the rabbit is based on something they call not an LLM, but an LAM, large action model. Mm-hmm. And the inclusion of the camera in the rabbit device was intended to allow you to have it watch what you're doing on the screen in an app. Eventually, it doesn't have this capability today, but it does have an action capability in its sort of earliest versions to allow you to speak to the rabbit and have it operate your Spotify, operate your email, that sort of thing. And how do you train an action model, which is really what we're asking of an agent, right? We're asking an agent to be able to take actions in our environment. So what are the training routines for creating a sophisticated agent that knows how to take action, not only generally speaking, but also in the particular configuration of your screens and your compute environment? That's, I think, the first place where agents will start to appear is going to be in the digital realm. Eventually, we'll have agents that can have embodied executors, shall we call them, that can work in the real world and deliver monkey fingers to press buttons in a robotic way. But that's the question for me is, how do you really get an agent that is controllable, to what you guys were discussing, in the sense that it has some knowledge of how humans act as agents with agency in the world or in the digital realm? And I guess the logic of the rabbit was that it can watch while you do it. And that's also the approach that Code Interpreter takes. It has a device that would be built into it. Has a module that's running on your desktop, in effect, watching what's happening. And you talk to it. You say, okay, now I'm going to do this, and I want you to do that again for me in some way. That's very interesting agency. How do you train those models to do that? Because there aren't examples that's the thing. Data out there. It's live action. How do you train a model on a live action?
Well, I think the rabbit's an excellent example, Andy. I think you've answered it. You just have the model live on the machine that the person is doing their thing, and then that's the example, right? Hey, I edit this video every day. I do this, 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 and this. Well, guess what? That model just learned how I do my actions, right? And if I do it repeatedly enough, it gets enough examples, and if I have to make corrections and it's like, oh, you did something a little different this time, let's take note of that. And through that repetition, through those multiple examples, it gets a good idea of how to do it. And then you just turn it on one day and see how well it does.
So, one thing I want to leave, I think, closing things to think about, and it has kind of nothing to do with an LM, but kind of does. I was thinking about it more. The Rabbit, Humane, Friend.com, I think they were one of those things that are in the AI timeline a little early for what it was supposed to be. There's a promise there. It's supposed to do all this stuff. I don't think certain features are available yet. The agentic capability that it's supposed to have, not there yet. The vision capability, not there yet. Because when you said, what triggered this was, Andy, when you talk about camera, the camera kind of is there, but imagine that being powered by GPT-4o vision and GPT-4 advanced voice. That turns that rabbit into a much more powerful device. Now, people are still going to say, well, why even have that when you have your phone? Cool, that's a good argument. But certain things are not available in the rabbit yet. And I think it was a little bit overpromised, or hoping that the tech was there. It's not there quite yet. So maybe in a year, but think about what Altman and OpenAI just invested in, whatever millions we talked about yesterday, a webcam, right? Why would you think a webcam? Well, it has vision to see certain things. So if you have something to see certain things, an AI can then see the environment around you. So to me, the pieces are starting to become a little bit more clear on where certain things or where the direction is they want to go. So, and then tying it back to the LLM, I was like, okay, yeah, when you're training an internal LLM, you've got to account for all these things too. Like, how is this different than what the person has? Can your LLM do everything like an agent can do? And how do you put the controls on that?
I like the idea that agents, personal agents, are going to be disclosed to everything that you see, hear, and do. You're going to allow that agent to be watching over your shoulder, either from within the desktop or from the, Meta Ray-Ban frames that you're wearing that have a camera built into them, and they're watching the screen too. And that gets to the question of privacy and control. How do I make sure that my agent doesn't disclose unnecessarily to some other agent or to the, get hacked in some way so that it's revealing things that I'm looking at on my screen? Heaven forbid that you see the things I'm seeing on this screen right now. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So let's wrap it here. Unless you guys have something else you want to add. I think it's a very interesting future. I think it's a natural extension of the question of training LLMs, right? Are you going to train your own LLM, or are you going to start with one of the foundation models and their capable, reasoning skills? Well, eventually you're going to train your own AI, and that AI is going to be an agent that has vision and voice interaction with you and can see and mimic the things that you do in the real world. All right. That's going to be it for today's show. Join us next week. We have a raft of shows coming up, but also go to thedailyAIshow.com, and there just sign up for our newsletter. It comes out just once a week, and it's a digest of things that were topical that week. We don't try to rehash what was said on the show, but you can go back and look at the shows or look at the transcripts on YouTube if you like. But we try to do a compact little presentation of things that are of interest to you, either for your business or just in your monitoring of the things that are happening in the world of AI that we're watching and finding interesting. So that's the end of the show today. Thank you very much, everybody who was in the chat. It's always wonderful to be seeing the flow of conversation that's happening in the live stream chat on YouTube there. And have a great weekend, everyone.
Aloha.